I work at a company that specializes in training people in soft skills. If you aren't familiar with what this entails, it usually involves training HR representatives, new employees, and anyone that's interested in improving their communication and teamwork skills in corporate settings. Think of it like an advanced Toastmasters sort of thing, but for the corporate world. Our team is pretty experienced, and a lot of trainers are psychologists, public speakers, and experienced PR agents who previously worked at large companies. I joined this place about 4 years ago, initially working as an intern, but soon making my way up the ranks. I was now in charge of about 4 different areas of training, but mostly trained people in communication skills and body language. The company was quite successful, and the CEO, who I might occasionally refer to as boss, was a hardcore workaholic. Unfortunately, this meant an endless number of meetings every day, many of which were completely unnecessary. He was constantly trying to find ways to improve productivity, and would do this by wasting everyone's time. For example, trying to have us all act in mock sessions where each person took turns in demonstrating how we taught the sessions. He would use this as an opportunity to find faults in us and our presentation, even if they were very minor. He loved pointing out how we had so many areas we needed to improve on. To an outsider, this might initially look like a useful way at improving team performance. However, he was a real narcissist, and his ego, the size of a mountain, always found its way into everything and ruined it. He would sarcastically say, "If you really think that you can do better, then why don't you run the company?" And numerous other snide remarks like that, and he would spit at you when he got triggered for even the smallest of reasons. It had become a nightmare to work with him, and I was almost ready to quit. It wasn't all bad though, as my colleagues were some of the coolest people I ever met and made life at the company tolerable. September was when we usually had the annual board meeting. Our CEO would make one of us responsible each year, assisting him in arranging all the minor details, many of which were actually his responsibility. For example, he would assign the work of statistical analysis and performance comparison between the current year and the previous years to people who had no experience in doing such work. This invariably led to a lot of errors and stress for whichever poor soul he decided to pick on. It usually went in turns, and this year I was the victim. I did have some experience now though, so I wasn't too bothered with being chosen because it meant that some of my other duties were given to colleagues so I could focus solely on this. One thing to remember about the board in our company is that the chairman and members wielded considerable power. This always caused our CEO to always be somewhat edgy and nervous whenever board meeting season approached. As usual, the boss waited till the last minute to send me the data I needed. I had been asking him for access to the documents that I needed to make a presentation with, and he would keep saying that he needed to go over them some more. Normally, it takes about 2 months for us to prepare everything, but because of his delays, I ended up having only 3 weeks of time to work. I was stressed out and was working about 11 hours every day, and while I had overtime, the pay wasn't even that great to start with. I was just hoping that I didn't make any errors that would need me to start everything all over again. The first order of business was to analyze how much growth happened this year for a sort of progress presentation. Every year, just before the board meeting, we would get an email from the big boss with the data that we needed, along with instructions on how to prepare a presentation from it. We always found this super weird because it isn't something that most CEOs do, considering how important the work was. Being directly related to the board meetings and all that, I guess he was just one of those types that wanted to involve the workers in everything, even if it wasn't too appropriate. So the days are ticking away, and I'm going through the spreadsheet that he sent me. It basically contained records of every single batch and every single trainee, along with a financial breakdown of gross income and net profit after all expenses. As I worked on comparing this year's data with the last, I found it odd that the difference was only about 4%. I looked a little more and saw that there was never much variance in the growth over the last 6 years. It always seemed to be stuck at around 3 to 5% margin. Perhaps this was normal, but the amount of growth that I had personally seen in my own experience over the last 4 years felt far more than an average of 3 to 5%. For context, in the first year that I joined, I remembered the classes peaking at about 15 to 20 trainees. In the second year, I remembered towards the end we started to see 60 to 70 members in each group consistently. In subsequent years, the number of trainees who approached us kept increasing, and we were constantly launching different types of courses, with all of them reaching pretty high numbers of trainees. It was clear that the company was doing really well, which made the 4% growth figure a little strange. I called my colleague over and showed this to him, and even he found it odd and commented that it felt like this year was more like 15%. Now, one thing you need to remember is that none of us knew who was in charge of tracking this financial data. None of us ever had this responsibility. Maybe there was an accountant that worked in the company, but in my 4 years, I had never seen anyone in that sort of position. What we did have access to, however, were our own class logs that we maintained. These didn't contain any financial data, of course, but they did contain figures from every single batch and how many students were in them. This data was stored in a workbook that all the trainers had access to. Anyway, it was about 1 week until the board meeting when I noticed this, and I was trying to find a good time to bring up my discovery to the boss. He finally seemed free, and I walked up to him and said, "Hi, sorry to bother you, but I think I found a small mistake in this area. It looks..." He interrupted me saying, "If there's a mistake, fix it. That's what you're paid for, isn't it? You don't have to come to me with every little question like a child." Shrug. Fine by me. In hindsight, I don't know why he didn't immediately pounce at me and ask me what the mistake was, considering he clearly knew that I was referring to the financial statistics. Over the next 3 days, I cross-referenced the data that I received from the boss and the data that the trainers had. To say it was inconsistent was an understatement. Several batches had multiple student names missing from the data. In fact, there was data missing all over the place. In some batches where our record showed 70 trainers, his data only showed 30. As I pored over the two sources, I soon found that there were several hundreds of missing entries. I thought about informing him what I was doing, but he had been a nightmare to deal with these last few weeks, so I went ahead and I amended his data to include all of the forgotten entries. This took an entire day, and when I made the final calculation, the difference came to a whopping $350,000. I ran the calculations one more time, and yep, it came up to $350,000 once more. That was a ridiculous amount of money. Close to $500,000 that simply didn't exist in his books, and this was just for the current year. I had suspected something being off with the numbers for the last 2 years, but figured it was just me not having a head for this sort of thing. My suspicions that something was not adding up were now confirmed, and I had solid evidence. I shared what I had learned with a few of my close colleagues, and they were equally shocked. Anyway, I went ahead and saved the data, created the presentation, and sent it to him the next day. I knew he was traveling the entire next day and wouldn't be checking it, and there was a high chance that he wouldn't bother to open it until the board meeting was happening. He replied back with a thumbs up emoji. The board meeting happened the day after. I was back to taking my sessions when I got a call from my boss. I pick it up and he tells me I am needed in the conference room immediately. I walk in and I see all the board members sitting there all serious. I look at my boss, who points a finger at a slide being projected. "Hi, can you explain the meaning of this?" He was staring me right in the eye, trying to conceal his rage. I looked at the slide. It was the one that I had made that contained the financial summary of the current year. I looked back at him. "Sorry, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at." "Explain the meaning of what?" "These numbers are incorrect. It shouldn't be 15% growth, it should be 4%. It's funny how he knew what it should add up to, considering he had sent the data to me for analyzing. He quickly scrolls through the spreadsheet on his laptop, his eyes widening as he starts to realize what I had done. "What did you do? Have you been messing with company data?" he asked with an incredulous voice, obviously trying to imply that I messed up greatly. I reply calmly, "I told you about an error I found and you told me to fix it, so I did." "No, you didn't. You have been messing with the company data, and this is a serious offense. God knows what else you've been messing with, he sputtered while scrolling up and down as if that was going to help. I open my mouth to explain, but he interrupts and proceeds to fire me right there in front of the board members. I have no tolerance for this sort of thing. I was kind of expecting him to fire me, so I managed to not break my composure. I had been wanting an out anyway. He looks toward the board members and starts to apologize to them and tells me to get out. I can see him trying to continue with the presentation, but the chairman suddenly speaks up and tells him to hold on for a moment. He then turns to me and asks, "What's all this about the data? What did you say you did?" I start to explain how before each board meeting, he would send us performance data and have us tabulate and create presentations from it. Hearing this, some of the members look at the CEO with a "seriously" look on their faces. Another board member speaks up and asks me who oversees the recording of this data. I replied that we got all of our data directly from the CEO and I didn't know where it came from. At this point, several of the board members are starting to turn the pages and quickly becoming aware of a serious implication. I continue explaining how I had noticed several records of students missing when I compared his data with the logs that we trainers maintained. From the corner of my eye, I can see my boss looking like he was going to be sick. The chairman then asked me what the difference was between the data that I received from my boss and the data that we already had collected. I hesitate for a moment before stating, about $350,000 in net profits this year, and 15% of growth instead of 4%. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. Thank you for clarifying this with us. You can leave. As I exit the room, my heart was pounding heavily in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. We later found out that the boss had been doing this for several years, and by rough calculation, we figured that the amount that he had skimmed would have been a few million at the very least. We all expected him to face prison time for this, but somehow it never happened. He was, of course, sacked shortly after the internal investigation that was carried out. At the end of it, a close, very senior colleague of mine made interim CEO, and I was told that I still had my job. They even offered me a promotion, which I naturally took. We never saw the CEO man again, for which we thanked our stars. I love the fact that he was the only one who told me to fix the mistake, which is exactly what I did. It was hilarious to see how those very words led him to getting fired and getting me promoted. To be honest, the fact that we wouldn't be having endless meetings ever again thrilled me much more than any sense of karma ever could. Background: I did some service work on advertisement displays at gas stations. Working at gas stations is highly regulated. You need to wear protective clothing, like signal vests, goggles, security boots, a helmet, and secure your workplace. 1.5 meters around you, nobody else is allowed. Even when you are working in the customer area, where everybody else, including the staff, walks around casually. The certifications needed to do this work are boring as hell, take a whole weekend of my precious time, and must be done once a year. If the oil company finds out that you did not follow this protocol, you risk your contract. Our customer explicitly writes in every work order and sign-off sheet that this protocol has to be/was followed. We techs sign this. If we do not follow protocol, we are really, really screwed. Now, let's get started. I was having a really bad day. The last call was somewhere remote, but from where I was, it would only take about an hour to drive. From where I usually start, it would be more than 2. The reported error was something that could be solved easily by rebooting a system. And frankly, we have never understood why this was an issue that needed an on-site visit from us, but the customer insisted. When this particular error happens, we usually go on the site, set up, suit up, tell the manager what we need to do, and then ask them to step a little to the side. In 9 out of 10 cases, the reboot button can be reached with a long screwdriver, so no ladder and no secured work area is needed. It takes less than 5 minutes. Confirming that everything works with the customer takes around 10 minutes. This stretches the security protocol just a little bit, but we all, techs working with this customer, agreed that this would be okay, Nobody would be endangered, and in this special case, everyone would benefit. So I called dispatch and informed them at 1500 that I would head out to this location. At 1600, I could literally see the sign of the gas station up ahead. My phone rang and I was informed that our customer ordered me to abort because today they only work until 16:30. I tried to reason that this job would be done in less than 15 minutes and that I was already on site. No. Customer wanted to leave early today. I was furious. So, as I arrived the next day, I did what every responsible tech would do. I assessed the situation and found that the one button I needed to push was just out of reach, and thus I needed to set up a ladder. This meant that I needed to set up a proper workplace. This meant, by the safety regulations, I needed to close down the registers. I informed the manager, and to my great surprise, he did not like this. Dispatch informed our customer of the situation. I was told to wait while they discussed the situation. An hour later, I had a nice chat with the manager and a really good coffee. The customer asked if I could do the work without securing my work zone. Naturally, I informed them that I am a certified technician and that the security regulations are very clear about what has to be done. I also reminded them that this was in their work order and sign-off sheet that I and the local manager need to sign, that all security measures had been taken. They needed to discuss the matter a little more, so I got another coffee. An hour later, I was asked again to just do my work without closing down the registers. I reminded them again of the security protocol, but offered to do as they asked if they would send me this in writing. One coffee later, and I was cleared to leave the site. This could have been the end of it, but no. As this device still needed a reboot, I got a work order for it 2 days later, and lo and behold, the button was still just out of reach. Same game, same outcome. So, instead of letting me do my job when I was already on site, they paid me an absurd amount for not doing my job because of a very strict security protocol they insisted on.